days for you is just another degree of revelation, insight.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just sharing some of the journey that hopefully other people can relate to, and see it from, you say, progressively maturing into areas that before you didn't have access to, or you've now grown to be able to experience and engage. I think the key for me is that unless you do learn to live in dual realms, you're never going to fully function how Jesus did, because that's how he did it. He was continually engaged with the Father, even though he was on earth, and therefore continually flowing from the Father's heart. And therefore, he'd always knew what the Father was doing, knew the Father's heart, because he was continually in relationship with him. John 14 says, well, he was in the Father was in him. And I think that's the relationship that we need to look to try and develop, so that we're living that way. And then you then find that your capacity to do things in that realm increases, even while you're doing things here. And then your capacity to do things here increases. As you start ruling in the realms of heaven, so heaven then begins to manifest on earth around your life, through your life, in your life. And your capacity increases because you're not subject to things, but ruling over them, and they're subject to you. So I think, sonship and what that really means is so important for us to begin to grasp and experience and engage, and find our identity and our position in that realm. So, so living in dual realms for me was something I first started to do in 2012, and subsequently have expanded from being linear and doing things from one place to another in the realms of heaven, to being able to be in multiple places all at the same time and function from all those places. So my sort of flow went from a trickle of one place to a whole lot of streams flowing together into a river, which can then flow through us into this realm and connect to this realm, and essentially prepare everything in that realm for everything to flow into this realm. So it was a key sort of part of my journey.
The you mentioned this week, Jonathan Sturgeon, was it? I think
Joseph Sturgeon.
Joseph.
Joseph Sturgeon, yeah.
And I sent for it, of course. Good old Amazon,
Yeah.
But it's been along the line. The reason I was jumped on it is because it's where I'm at now. Right now is in the quest, the progress of the men in white, and just maybe open up a little bit of that today, if we can. I believe when you ask, you receive.
Yeah.
And one of the differences, the things that we're experiencing have always happened in some form, but the big difference I'm seeing is the proactive approach, instead of waiting on the Lord for something. And occasionally through your life you have a experience, but with the thing that we're walking in now is we can go and come, or we step in by faith, or we step in and because we've been invited, for instance, one thing. So with the men in white, it's been back here for years, even theologically, just kind of floating out there. But I asked the other day, this last week or two, and then had a blast of revelation now that I wrote down on a particular vein. And if we ask, we receive. So I believe a man in white came to me and gave me that revelation. And for several months now, I've been talking about voices. We hear voices, and we always have attributed them to one single voice. Now, we know the Holy Spirit's behind everything, the Father's behind everything. So I'm not taking away anything from that,
Hmm.
but I'm learning the messengers are different. And the men in white have a message just as from the Father for us.
Hmm.
So that's kind of where I'm at today. Maybe you can reflect on that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, my experience with that, has come from, you know, would have been no foundation for that at all in the past, and would have been very much sort of like, whoa, that's really really dodgy. So, but when I first went into heaven, I had met Jesus, the Holy Spirit, eventually the Father, and engaged with them. But as you say, they have messengers, sometimes angelic messengers, sometimes part of the cloud of witnesses who become men in white linen, who then engage us. And I found that along my journey, they've been very helpful. And sometimes I've engaged them out of desire, and sometimes I've engaged them because God assigned them. And they show up either when I engage heaven or actually sometimes around here in this realm. And so, my initial engagement was in heaven and with Jacob. That was the first one I ever met, and very significant in unveiling the meaning of Bethel and the house of God and being a gateway of heaven. And that was a really key, significant thing because he asked me to go and read, that era of his life. And as I read it, it just unveiled to me. He didn't say anything particularly other than his engagement did something. There was a resonance, some sort of connection. That when I did read his life story, it was like reading it from his perspective, telling me. It wasn't just me reading the Bible. So there was something alive that came out of it because of his encouragement to engage it. And I really began to appreciate that when you do have an encounter like that, God has a significant purpose behind it, even though you may not be aware of it to begin with. That set me on a journey to discovering, that I am a house of God, that I'm a gateway of heaven, that I have access into heaven through, the door that stands open and the Lord standing there and angels come around my life, and all that stuff really came out of that first engagement with Jacob, and then subsequently looking at Genesis 28 and looking at the stuff it talks about there. So that for me was an encouragement. And then when others engaged, then it wasn't sort of so much of a surprise. It was like, okay, this is part of God's agenda. Sometimes he sends those that are relatable to, or they relate to us in a particular way. So, that certainly was my experience, and that they were assigned. Recently, I've had a number of encounters over the last few years, but especially over the last few months, in which Esther, Queen Esther, showed up at one of our meetings, and I was like, "Ooh, what are you here for?" sort of thing. And she said, "Well, I'm here to remind everyone that everyone's called for a time such as this. You're called to the kingdom for now, and I want to remind you." So I thought, okay, that's really good. But I thought there was more to it than that. So I pursued her when I went into heaven, and then I set my desire upon engaging her. So I went to the court of the upright and called for her, and she came. And then she went into a greater depth of her life and how most people don't realize their destiny until they're thrust out in the midst of it. Rather than it sort of creeping up on them. It was like she was basically saying, "Look, I wasn't prepared. I didn't know, but I was prepared in the sense of to meet the king. But then I was thrust into this situation, which took me out of my comfort zone. All the preparation that had gone on didn't prepare me for that. I didn't realize that I was being called to save the nation." So she shared quite a lot of things, really interesting. Then a few weeks ago, I bumped into David. King David came to one of our meetings with a key of David, and said he wanted to unlock the inner psalmistry in people, inner psalmist. And I'm like, okay, it's interesting, because again, it was in keeping with the season where we're looking to pursue sort of our engaging God and gatherings, and what are they for, and what is it about, and it's not just about singing songs. So how do you express to God and to each other the full meaning? So that was all good. So there were some significant times which have been key moments. Bob Jones showed up, a few days after he died with a scroll about the harvest, and so there have been some quite interesting occasions where we've engaged the men in white linen for us. I can remember the first time I went to the Court of the Upright, went in there, and there were 12 sort of seats, and there were 12 men in white linen sat there, and each of them had a mantle, and each of them had a torch, like a flaming torch, and they were assigned to our ministry as a council of reference. So I encouraged, our bench of 12 to engage them and to seek out what they wanted, whether they had particular messages for them or a particular emphasis. And we've continued to do that, encouraging people to just be open, both for God to engage that, but also to be proactive and, to see, has God assigned anyone to our lives or to our benches and different things. So certainly that's been a positive experience. That has always been some sort of springboard to something, or a revelation to something that's taken everything a little bit further, which is an important part of our journey. They're surrounding us, it says, so they're involved, whether people like that or not. They're involved. They're obviously not dead. They're alive. Their bodies might have gone into the grave, but their soul and spirit is fully functioning in that realm. We're not talking to dead people any more than Jesus talked to dead people when he talked to Moses and Elijah. Certainly if he did it, it gives us certainly the mandate to be able to do that freely. So yeah, I've certainly had some interesting encounters, challenging encounters, but good, and also I have gone there to the Court of the Upright. I met my dad there in an encounter. That was a real blessing from God to almost bring my father heart journey of healing and wholeness to a completion. I've met several others there that are people that I felt led to go and talk to, a couple of people who had died, and I really felt a mandate to go and bring a message to their people who were left behind. One of them, quite a significant situation where, this lady who I went to basically gave me a message, and that message was to free her husband to remarry, and not without any guilt, or not to feel he had to grieve, and in a way, and she was with him in supporting his future ministry. Key, really interesting things. And that one, it was quite an interesting thing, because she had a very specific looking dress on, clothing, and I sort of noted it. And then when I spoke to the guy about it, he said, "Oh, do you know what she was wearing?" And I described it, and she said, "I saw her in a vision a week before she died, wearing that very same thing you're describing." So that for him was a confirmation that I wasn't sort of totally off the wall and coming with a whole lot of psychic nonsense, but in reality, it's something which it helped him. And I think that is, again, possible if we're led to do so and feel a mandate to do so, but I wouldn't do it, without being led. But, I've done that a number of times. So I think very, very important to be open to whatever message God does bring through them, particularly that they want to support us at particular times in our lives and ministry, and that they come as a reminder of things at times, and sometimes just, along with angels, and they carry something which is a springboard to something new, or which I found very helpful. When we engaged our mountain benches, our Enterprise Mountain engaged, and it was Andrew Carnegie, the guy who was a philanthropist who created Carnegie Hall. And they found that really interesting, because they didn't know who he was. They Googled him. Mr. Google's very helpful for things like that, and found out, that his life and his whole heart um, was very much in line with the mandates that they had as part of their mountain. So I thought that was quite interesting. So yeah, yeah. But I think, some people I think Joseph Sturgeon's book and his thing that's his focus, and that seems to be the thing that really he is called to focus in. And he has a lot of insight and revelation of engaging them, probably much more than I do. Because for me, it's much more of if they turn up, I engage with them. And sometimes I'll feel led to, but majority of times, it's not my focus, but I have experience of it. But his focus, and I think the key when you get someone who's focused is to make sure that you balance that with other aspects of your life, because someone else will have a focus on meeting angels, or someone else will have a focus on using the courts of heaven, and someone will have a focus on different things. But to incorporate those all in our lives, not just one area. But God often gives someone a focus because that really, they carry the weight of it and they carry revelation of it. But probably most people are not called to focus the same way he does. But we can certainly learn from the revelation he's got to sort of bring that as part of our lives, so that we're open to that in our lives, and not necessarily consumed with the fact that's the only thing that we should be focusing on, because they help us to fulfill our destiny on earth as well as in heaven. And I think it's the on earth bit that sometimes they have some insight into, because they've been through this realm. They have an understanding of how to relate to this realm, and therefore can help us in that as well. So, yeah.
Well, those who are called to focus, on a particular thing, get the benefit of the backlash of it from those who don't, aren't in agreement with it. I'm thinking of Kenneth Hagin in the 70s. That's all he preached was faith. But boy, he planted it deep in the heart of the church, for sure. At least my life.
Yeah.
But like you say, there has to be, you have to have the whole field planted, not just one seed.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a manifoldness to God, which we must not get caught and focused into one small aspect and miss so much more of the manifold, multi-faceted nature of God and the kingdom. And it's great to learn from lots of different sources, and to ultimately, obviously, to engage for ourselves and learn directly from God, which would be the ideal. But then God does use others to help us. Yeah, very good.
I've been kind of drawn toward Rick Joyner lately, listening to some of the things he's putting out. And over the years, I have on occasion, but I've never looked in and never been drawn to his book on the quest. Have you ever read that?
Yeah.
And I'm hearing that was a journey he had into the mountain, into the things of God, and shame on me for not doing it sooner, but I just wasn't drawn to it.
Yeah, but I think sometimes you're not drawn until perhaps sometime that will be useful, and I think, I read a lot of books, probably around the 90s into 2000 a lot. And then I got drawn to pursuing God myself for my own experiences of God, not just what I would read in books. But I found a lot of them, his books, quite interesting. The Epic Battles of the Last Days was another one, which is like a series of visions that he had of heaven and how heaven related to earth. And they're quite insightful, and now when I read them then, it's just felt like this is something like Lord of the Rings, whereas now, having experienced the stuff myself, now I can see, what he was trying to describe, because it's not easy to describe. He was describing a dream or a vision that he was having, which was very much a real encounter. And I think now reading some of those again, I would probably have a different insight to what he was trying to say. But now I don't need to read them in the same way because I've had my own experiences, So, but I think some of those things, they go in, and then when you do have the experiences, they sort of, it's not totally unexpected, because some of those things create a background information, if you like, that when you then experience, something says, oh yeah, this is okay, or yeah, this is validated in some way because others have had similar experiences or have written them. So I know, the quest and the epic battles of the last days were certainly two that I found quite, enlightening, just because it was like hey, you can have visions of this stuff. I mean, I'm coming out of the Brethren Church, so having visions of stuff was not something that was part of our liturgy, let's say. So when I started to read those things, it was expanding what was possible, I think.
Well, here again, just to reflect back on what I started with, he writes the book, but there's no emphasis that I understand that from my background, we had that ability and availability, but it was for the special. It was for, if God did it to someone, then that was special, instead of going into it. So I don't hear that from the result he had. I don't hear him following that up in his current conversations. Like we can go in on go and come.
No, and I think that, to be honest, is the difference between those that have crossed over and are living there and inviting others to come and join them, with those who've had encounters, but it's not their everyday experience. He had those visions. I'm not sure he's living on the other side of the veil. Because they were experiences that sort of tried to relate to earth and what was going on in a spiritual sense. And I think a lot of ministries who have some sort of encounters don't always follow them up, and they don't become a lifestyle. Then they don't teach people how to do it. It's like he's the visionary. He writes the books. Other people read the books, rather than, hey, go and pursue God for these things yourself, which I think is a difference. And I think a lot of ministries like that are still in the wilderness. I don't think they've crossed. I don't think are actually teaching people to live in those realms and engage those heavenly realms. They, of course, teach people to be open to visions, but I'm not sure that that he followed that through to conclusion, that this was actually about our ability to live in the realms of heaven and engage heaven for ourselves, rather than just see something which was an allegory to the spiritual dynamics that was going on amongst God's people on earth, and how God might relate to them from heaven, but rather than coming into heaven and beginning to actually occupy and live on that mountain of the house of the Lord, or Mount Zion in heaven. So I think, there are a lot of people who are at that point where they've had experiences, they've had encounters, but I'm not sure that they're facilitating that or being open for others in the same way, of an expectation that, hey, you can all do this. This is not for special people. This is for everybody. If I'm a forerunner, let me open it up for you. And I'm not sure most of that generation are. I mean, even people like Bill Johnson and people like that, their focus is still on heaven coming to earth, rather than from us going to heaven and then bringing heaven to earth, or being a gateway for heaven into the earth. So it's almost like, heaven invading earth, which is almost sort of like, well, heaven's going to bust through into the earth, rather than, hey, the door's open in heaven. And the invitation is to go there so that we could be a gateway of heaven into the earth. And I don't think a lot of those sort of ministries that brought people up to the promised land, they're still operating like Moses, I think, and the Moses type generation. Well, we've come up to this point, but we're not helping you come in, which is, I think, is the difference between those who are functioning in Joshua generation. It's all about crossing over and encouraging others to cross over and to engage their inheritance there. And think for some ministries, they're still operating with this top down, we're the apostolic covering, or we're the covering which is over you, and therefore that to me is a Moses ministry definition, really, of operating top down, mediatorial, telling people what God said, revealing the visions to them, but never really giving them the hope that that's possible for them, because they're still the main man in the ministry, you know. Um,
Mike,
yeah,
I so totally agree with you. I'm so happy you mentioned that, because they are really still operating in or organization, not organism as a whole body. And I actually personally heard from a friend who goes to Morningstar, and I was surprised that Justin Abram was
yeah,
invited there, but
yes,
he
yeah,
was not well treated afterward, and I it that just hurt my heart. That
yeah.
because yeah, so and I'm just so um, uh, missed out on your and Dr. O's meeting at the conference, but I'm sure that was amazing. I wanted to actually ask you about, since you met Dr. O, and how what Dr. O taught about and studying about the cherubic nature in us. And I was wondering, what is your experience on being awakened to cherubic nature in us, and about the angel that's supposed to come with us from heaven at our birth, but it's all suppressed and uh, actually unconscious rather than even subconscious.
Yeah.
Um, so how do we, I mean, he talks about a little bit of things, but I would need to get your experience on how to be awakened and go into that unconscious and connected to the angel,
Mm,
your angel that
sure.
you're supposed to work with to bring, I mean, to become who we supposed to be in our destiny scroll. Thank
Yeah.
you.
I mean, I think, the whole thing with certainly the Moses Ministries thing. I definitely think, there's a yeah, there's when I mean, I heard the same thing with Justin Abraham. Yes, he went to Morning Star, and yeah, there was some public denunciation of him, which was not a good thing. And I think that that's what shows when God gives a group of people the opportunity of embracing the new, and they resist, then they become the Moses to that new, and they refuse to cross, which is sad, but it's God giving them an opportunity. And if they fail to take that opportunity, I believe some of them will end up being removed, because they become opposition to people crossing over. Because when people hold those high levels of responsibility, then that responsibility is a serious responsibility, and they're accountable. And when you then have an opportunity of embracing what God is doing and you reject it, you are really accountable for that rejection, because you're not just rejecting it on behalf of yourself. You're now putting your whole movement in perhaps rejecting what Justin brought. And I don't know exactly how he brought it or what he brought it, and he was probably a bit challenging, no doubt, if he was functioning as he normally does. But that doesn't excuse people having the discernment to be able to discern something coming from heaven, even if the package is not to their liking. And not everyone likes everyone's delivery method, but it doesn't mean the message is incorrect. And I feel that, again, that's part of the old ministry, is entrenching, but God giving them opportunities, but them not receiving them. And that will be sad if those ministries die in the wilderness, along with those who are leading them, when they've rejected crossing over and rejected helping others to cross over under their so-called coverings. So that for me is definitely something that I feel sad about. And and would like that to change. But if it doesn't, then people are going to have to come out from those ministries to discover those things for themselves. And there will no doubt be those that were there when Justin shared what he shared who resonated with it. Now they're going to have a choice. Now our leaders have denounced this person, but we resonated with what he was saying, and we believe he was reflecting something of what God's heart is. So now you've got a choice. Stay under those that are covered you and are, in a sense, opposing what God's doing, or step out from under it and go and pursue it yourself. And hopefully people will pursue it. Because there's, a danger in when you start hindering what God's doing. I think Gamaliel, when he was approaching the early church, and what was going on, was very much wait and see. If this is of God, then you really don't want to be in opposition to it. If it's not of God, it'll fall away. And you don't have to come out and do something, actually just let God reveal. But I understand people feel, obliged to protect their flocks. so they tend to make judgments, ill-advised judgments sometimes on what people have said. So that's certainly something I think we need to be aware of and be ministrating that these guys in the wilderness will see the promised land and want to cross over and help others to cross over and not be stuck there. The other thing with the cherubic nature, when you first get involved with the Sod of God and your destiny is unveiled, there are angels assigned to you. Some of those would be called guardian angels. Some of them are, one of them is an angel that's also ministrating your throne in heaven until you're seated there. I think the cherubic nature is really about the four faces of God and carrying the reflection of God's government in lion, ox, eagle, man, because that's what the cherubim had, the four faces of God revolving, and wings full of eyes and the ability to see and a lot of symbolic things. But it's essentially re-engaging with who you were. So re-engaging with the spiritual dynamic that was in operation before you came into this earth. So there was also a destiny involved in being light and being part of the fabric of light, having a place within a tree of life and in Metatron's cube and as a position within that of light. And that's something I think which is going to be unveiled more and more to people as they begin to discover that they're made in the image of God and the likeness of God, and were made to be creative. And I think some of that nature is what the sort of four faces of God reveals, our position within God's government of standing in his name and being a representative of that government into the earth. I think for me personally, my mind needed deconstructing to reconnect me to the memories of who I was. And it was like I discovered through encounters really that I reconnected to my place in creation. My desire for creation's grown, to answer creation's grown, really started to increase through those encounters. And they were, we have a destiny before we come here, we have a destiny while we're here, and we have a destiny after we're here, whether we continue to be here and go into the age to come or move into that realm, whether we're translated there or physically die. There is an ongoing destiny to fulfill, and all three of those parts are important to reconnect, because that brings full government. If we're only operating of what we are here, then we're not in full government, because we need to reconnect to who we were, and we need to establish who we will be. And so there's an importance to have those three elements working in our lives. And for me, those experiences came from engaging with who I am, my identity as a son of God, and reconnecting to that identity in the various aspects of its outworking. And that came by pursuing through encounter and God unveiling it and revealing it to me, and through encounters. It wasn't taught as much as I experienced things that unveiled it. And I think if you set the desire of your heart towards sonship, then it will get unveiled. I mean, Dr. O you know, he's a really great guy. I honor him for his wisdom and insight into lots of different things. We're sort of somewhat chalk and cheese from, you know, in one sense, because he's, you know, a Jewish mystic from with a Jewish background and is now operating in the kingdom. And I'm very much not coming from a Jewish background, so I have no theological background in any of that. And he does. He's a theologian. So he has a history of a lot of insight and wisdom and insight and knowledge. You know, but I'm sort of a bit more practical in, well, what are we supposed to do with it? That's my key. Okay, we have all these things, but what are we supposed to do with them? Not just experience them, but actually outwork them. So I sort of have a more, I think, governmental perspective of how these things get outworked. But it was very interesting. There were some real golden nuggets of truth that he revealed, and he was, you know, very free in sharing with us, and it was great to hang out with him and, you know, to be there for a few days with him and listen to some of the things. I resonate with some of the things. I don't resonate with everything, like with everybody, you know, and everyone should go back to God with them for themselves and find the revelation in God for themselves. And that's what you need to do. If you're going to discover what that nature is, that governmental sonship, then you need to engage God. I don't think you're going to get it by engaging in anyone with anyone's teaching as much as by experience. The teaching or the testimony should just help you to desire to pursue it, and then God will begin to unveil it and reveal it. You know, and there's, you know, there's a lot of things within sort of the Jewish mystic tradition which are part of the Jewish mystic tradition and are not necessarily all relevant to us as Christians. Some of them very clearly are part of our heritage, and they're part of the heritage of the people of God. And some of it, you know, I wouldn't go around wearing a hat on the top of my head, you know, or a cap thing, but you know, because I'm not sure, you know, he feels comfortable doing that when whatever that means to him, you know. And I think we've just got to be open to engaging God for the revelation that brings to us. And you know, I had a great time there and felt very free when I shared, when I got to do my sessions, in a way which was good. I mean, it opened up a lot of people's eyes to potentially a lot more. You know, now they've got to go and pursue it. I think that's the key in everything. You go to a conference and you get some sort of insights into some things which you say, am I going to pursue this or not? You know, is this significantly important enough, or do I resonate with strongly enough that at this point I'm going to actually really pursue that? And you know, if the cherubic nature of man is something that resonates with you, yeah, pursue it and ask God to unveil it and give you a revelation of the full nature of what it is to you. I'm not convinced that you just need to find one angel. I think there are angels assigned to us, and certainly they, you know, my angel in the realms of heaven was administrating my throne in heaven in bringing the kingdom around my life, you know, for a long time before I got to be seated there. So, you know, I honor that angel for God, for the work they did in bringing me to some level of maturity in my life and taking me through experiences that brought me to where I am, you know, because that they were involved in that process. You know, but I think it needs to become an experience, otherwise it will just be information, and therefore you need to encounter it if it's going to be transformatory to your life. So pursue the experience, ask God to reveal that to you, you know, engage with wisdom, ask her to unveil it, go to the four faces of God, start engaging them, step into the four faces, and you can start seeing from their perspective. Because the point of that nature is that we carry the fullness of God's government, you know, and then we can see through the eyes of the lion and begin to speak through that and roar. You know, we can see from that perspective. It gives us a heavenly perspective to then begin to manifest that on earth. As you obviously read things in Ezekiel, but to be honest, you're still reading someone's interpretation of a weird experience that they had. It's better to have your own weird experiences, and then you can then essentially begin to outwork those experiences with God, because they become personally revelatory. You're always going to need some sort of interpretation that leads into an experience. Otherwise, it's just theory. And we need experience to really know the truth of who we are in terms of sons of God in the order of Melchizedek, which is really what that cherubic nature is talking about. We are designed to carry the government of God. So.
Mike, would you say we need to learn the Joseph principle? When he had the dream, he told the wrong people. And I think that's some of us preachers, we get a revelation on Saturday night, want to preach it Sunday, and I've gotten in trouble more than a few times with that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I won't really preach or teach anything until I've got a living experience of it in my life as a lifestyle. Otherwise, it's information. It may be my testimony information, but it's still information that I don't have the level of authority to teach unless it's part of me. So, which is why, I'm only now teaching some things that I experienced quite a number of years ago, because it's taken me that number of years to begin to, see that living in my life. Then I have some authority then to share, okay, my engagement with this and this and this and this. And some of that, is I think important for people to really grasp, because then you, as you say, Joseph had to learn the lesson the hard way. It's just like, and maybe some of that was character producing and defining in his life, and but he obviously wasn't the wisest in the way in which he shared his dreams, particularly in the culture which you had to honor the father, the head of the family line, and you had a whole load of brothers ahead of you in the pecking order, which was their tradition. Now, obviously, God breaks tradition. That's man's tradition. He breaks that, which is why he broke a lot of the firstborn, secondborn things, because the tradition was, and it wasn't God's tradition, it was man's, that firstborn gets this and firstborn gets that. You don't see God ever saying that there should be a birthright and a blessing. That was what the tradition that they had. So God breaks it by choosing Jacob rather than Esau, and choosing Joseph or choosing David, who were not the rightful inheritors or heirs. So I think God just says, hey, it's not about convention, it's about your destiny, and therefore pursuing your destiny is what's important in these things. And I think holding counsel, if you have close friends that you can talk up to things and bat things around and share experiences as a source of a sounding board, that's great. But I wouldn't want to be coming out and saying things before I really had them being a living example in my life. Otherwise, I could be leading people into something which is theory and not reality, or full reality until I've experienced it. So, the sort of chancellor's houses and all that stuff, I only taught that really, briefly a couple of years ago, and I just done a couple of sessions in the last conference about it. I didn't get too far with it because there were too many questions. So it was just like, I spent most of the time trying to field the questions around it, but I did share some basic things in terms of, how the things function and what their function is in our lives to bring order and to bring new seasons and to mean that we're not subject to time but have administration over it and things like that. So yeah, definitely I think we should be careful in not just launching out and sharing everything that we've experienced just automatically. And also testing our motives of our heart. Why did Joseph do that? He was the littlest, so was he trying to get one over on his brothers? By sort of trying to say, hey, you might be all ahead of me, but you're all going to bow down to me. And there might have been a level of immaturity in his sharing that caused them to be so angry with him. Some little guy who basically shares a dream probably shouldn't really have the effect of being thrown in a pit. and pretended that he was killed, so there must have been something that triggered that in him and them, and in perhaps how wise he was in how he shared it, perhaps. But the end of the story was, he was brought out into the center of the world stage and became second in charge of the biggest, greatest nation on the planet at the time. So that's pretty, saying that if we can follow through our dreams and our destiny, there is at the end of it fulfillment and an outworking of that, which may be very significant for the restoration of all things and creation itself. Don't underestimate ourselves. This little guy who went through all these things ended up, actually, seeing the fulfillment of that in a way he could never have imagined or thought. I doubt very much that when he had the dream that he was attributing it to being, head in Egypt, under the Pharaoh. So sometimes by going out too soon, we shape the dreams in our limitations of our own understanding and don't allow them to become outworked. Because if I try to, okay, here's my vision, here's my understanding, my interpretation of that vision, that will then shape what I believe. And that limits. If we try and shape what we believe, it will be limited to what God believes about us. So it's important to see it unfold, because then it will unfold in a way which will probably go beyond what we could have imagined or thought in the beginning. And there may well be others who are thrust into those positions in the future that, come out of a life of maturing in sonship, and then their sonship gets revealed and they're revealed on the earth, because that's the whole point. Creation is waiting for the revealing of the sons of God. And there's a revealing of our sonship.
Yeah. I don't think I've seen this with Joseph before, but the maturity showed up later when he was able to keep his mouth shut when his brothers showed up. He had learned by then to keep to say the right thing at the right time. I hadn't seen that before.
Yeah, and also in the prison, not complaining or grumbling that he wasn't recognized for his gift, because the time was right when his gift was unveiled, and then the recognition came. Because Pharaoh's recommendation with him was pretty awesome. In this is one in whom is the divine spirit. It's pretty good recommendation from Pharaoh, because of the way he conducted himself at that point, having matured, in his process of coming to the fulfillment of his dreams and destiny in God. So yeah. So anything else anyone wants to share or to talk about?
I just realized when you mentioned about that God didn't install the firstborn double blessing, and that was more like man's tradition rather than, and him being choosing, even though even Esau and Jacob, he was choosing Jacob by second. It wasn't always the first, and Joseph to be the one who's saving the whole nation. So that is just another revelation that you just bursted out, and I just really appreciate and honor you that about that that we really truly have to go to God and experience for ourselves rather than just hearing. And even though we teach and you openly say to everybody, this is how I experienced it, go out and get your own experience. So I really appreciate the freedom and openness that you offer, rather than just like what you said about the Morning Star Ministry, the others who feel like they have to have that authority to control people under them and not give them freedom to go out and experience for themselves. And but this is what we're doing as a, because I'm the head and leader of this. I mean, for as a leader, that is kind of trying to keep everybody follow my lead and keep them as a sheep. And like you said, compared to Moses' generation. So it's just I really appreciate your teaching and your leading for giving everybody the freedom to encourage others to experience, to really know, rather than, oh, you need to study this and this is my experience, so you will go through it, this specific things. And so I just really honor you and your ministry, and just really opening the people who are seeking, they really come and look up to you because that honesty and openness. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Yeah. I mean, I think for me, it's really important that people have their own encounters and they grow in their own life with God. And, if you can walk alongside or help people or point people in the right direction, great. But ultimately, it's down to each individual pursuing that for themselves. Everyone's got a destiny that God has called. And sometimes it isn't. Sometimes he uses the foolish things to confound the wise. You wouldn't have obviously chosen Joseph from being in prison and through his life story to be what he was. But then God sees the bigger picture and he sees the destiny that's behind that. And we all have one. And discovering that destiny and beginning to outwork it is just so important. And it can only be done through engaging for yourself. You can't get your destiny unveiled by someone else. No one can lay hands on you. Some people can prophesy, but generally, God wants to speak to you himself. And it's usually, through intimacy that destiny gets revealed. Identity comes through actually seeing ourselves reflected in his face. And what do we see? We see his call on our lives, and he's always choosing people that didn't think. Gideon, well, who would have chosen Gideon? The fearful one who was hiding. But God had a bigger picture. His destiny was to be a mighty warrior, and it was called forth by an angel. You mighty warrior. And it was just like, Gideon's like, who are you talking to? Because he didn't relate to it because it hadn't been called out of him. And I guess his parents and, being under those that were in the high places, and his parents were worshiping the wrong things and doing stuff, again, not the ideal thing. Well, then Abraham coming out of an idol maker's family, it's like you have these type of things which God, he just seems to be like, okay, I'm going to flout convention, and that people's destiny is what's going to cause me to call them, not their situations, not their past, not their educational system, but their destiny. And I think we'll see that. You see it all the way through. Jeremiah, called as a young boy to be a prophet to the nations, and he's just like, whoa, what, me? Serious? Are you serious? Type of thing. Well, that's part of it, I think. That God has called us, and he has a part for us to play in his kingdom, and everyone has a part to play. And we just need to discover who we are in that and not look to anyone else. Because you can't compare yourself to anyone. You can't be, well, I want to be like them. Yes, there's a sense where Paul said, well, where I'm like Jesus, that's a good thing to pursue. But he wasn't saying pursue me. He was saying pursue this aspect of my life, which is a reflection of Jesus. And the closer we get to looking into the intimacy of God in his face, then the more that we will see ourselves, and the more we will hear some of his thoughts about us, and we will get transformed into that image. Do not be conformed to the world. And the world wasn't the cosmos. It wasn't, didn't the world, the word there isn't cosmos, it's aeon, where we get eon from. So it was a period of time. So do not be conformed to your time period. So he was talking to them about their time period, which was the old covenant. Do not be conformed to the religious system of the old covenant or the political system of the day, because Jesus warned them, don't beware of the leaven of Herod and the Pharisees. And so that was the, be careful, of those systems, don't be conformed. Now today, let's make sure we're not going to be conformed to the belief systems and the mindsets, whether they be religious or scientific or anything else, that will conform us to the wrong age, because our confirmation should be of the new covenant and not of anything else. And therefore we live in this age, but we don't have to be negatively influenced by it. And we can be influenced by a bigger picture, our destiny fitting within. And therefore we can serve the purpose of God in this generation that we are in, without being conformed to it or let it be influenced by it. I used to talk a lot about free will, but I'm not convinced anyone's got free will, really. I think everyone's got the ability to choose, but that choice is influenced. You're influenced by something. Let's be influenced by what God says about us. Therefore, we agree with him, which is the transforming or the renewing of my mind, is the agreeing. I am going to be metanoid, because then I can have my mind in agreement with what he says, and then that will change me to be who he calls me to be, which comes out of that, intimacy of relationship. The more I look at him, the more I can become that which I look at, which is the image that he has created me in to be a son of God, conform to that image, which is great. Okay. All right. Okay. I'm going to leave it there. And,